your investments or the work that you do tend to revolve around achieving social good, and it might mean waiting a longer between some of the returns on your investments.
I actually am not that interested in a bunch of social good, to be honest with you. I'm interested in change. I'm basically convinced that people right now who are in positions of power are there for completely the wrong reasons and shouldn't be.
Okay.
And so the question is, well, how do you change the dynamics and the cycle of power and the balance of power? And in my opinion, when you empower individual people to make decisions, they tend to make more coherent decisions and they tend to make better decisions. And so when you look at a lot of sort of the problems that are ailing the United States or ailing the world, these are problems that bureaucracies have created. So, why is it that we all talk about how education is the most important thing in the world? And every politician to get elected has to have a position on education. But there's more than $1 trillion of student debt. It's the most encumbered sort of thing that an individual has to deal with. At the tail end of spending all of this money now, there's no guarantee of a job or any really meaningful employment. And then the worst thing is if you actually go bankrupt, that's the one thing that won't get expunged. And so you can see how the system is sort of tilted against you. It's really great rhetoric, right? But all of these people have no incentive to actually change the system. And so from my perspective, I'm more interested in sort of creating a dynamic where actually people are empowered and can live kind of lives where they are self-sufficient economically. They can do whatever they want. They can buy the things they need. They can have a great life. And if you look to these people who, again, we've put as false idols, they're just going to let you down. And they've let us down. And so I feel like technology and smart, people can creatively solve these problems in ways that policy and other things can't. And so I just want to do that because I think it's the right thing to do.
Right. Now you mentioned that you like investing in 3 sectors: education, healthcare, and financial services. Why those 3?
So let me go through each one. So healthcare, the reason I love it is because I think, so there's a macroeconomic reason, which is obvious, which is trillions of dollars of costs spiraling out of control. It's something that will literally bankrupt the United States and most of the Western world if we don't fix. And what we need to fix is correlating investment to outcomes and creating a cycle where the incentives aren't to, crack your body open and to do a bunch of random procedures, but to do all of the stuff upstream that actually allows you to live a healthy life. And to me, there's a lot of really clever things that software and hardware and products can do to do that. And so I like healthcare because I just think that you can save so many people's lives by doing interesting things. So I'll give you an example. So many people today don't even get a basic blood test.
Right.
Irrelevant where you live, Western world, developing world, third world, it just doesn't matter. But most of the major maladies of the world can be detected and fixed if you just had that. Now, the problem is you probably get a blood test once a year and it costs $1,000 and you go to a lab and you sit there with a bunch of other people and it's impersonal, it's kind of antiseptic and you don't like it. And so we're building this product that basically decomposes this $1 million machine down to a $100 machine that works off of your cell phone camera chip sensor. The same thing that you use to take pictures.
Very cool.
The reason why that's transformational is now you reduce the cost to dollars and individuals can do it in their bathroom or their home. And now all of a sudden you start to change the incentives for people to care about their own body and to understand their own body, and then they're empowered to actually do something. So that's why I like healthcare. Education, I think it's because policy is so fundamentally broken, we are letting down an entire generation. And the problem with that is that it'll create massive instability. So you're already seeing this now. People rioting in places like London a few years ago, Paris a few years ago, Spain a few months ago. When people rioted in the Arab Spring, that wasn't a political pushback. That was a socioeconomic pushback by all these young people who were like, we're frustrated, right? It was this fruit vendor that immolated himself that started the whole thing.
Right.
And so when you think about that, 1/3 of the world is under the age of 18 now. 1/3 of the population. Billions and billions of kids, young people who have all this potential. So how do you pay that off? By tricking them into forcing them to get into $150,000 worth of debt to go to school, to get a degree that maybe doesn't matter, where they can't get a job afterwards?
No.
Just so you can get reelected? I mean, that's terrible. Those are lies, right? And so I feel like if you can, for example, teach people how to code, which in my opinion is the most fundamentally obvious blue-collar job of the 21st century.
Right.
It's just a great thing. And you replace, trillions of dollars of cost and debt with hundreds of dollars of opportunity. It's just like an obvious trade-off. And then financial services, I just think there are a lot of people with great ideas. And I think there are a lot of people, when empowered with capital, can do really good things. And I'm really interested in ways where you can redistribute capital. And I think right now capital has been aggregated by a lot of these monolithic institutions that aren't trusted for a whole host of reasons. I think some are valid, probably some are not as valid. But in general, what's happened is a very risk-averse culture by people who control the lubricant that's necessary for economies to develop. And so if you can develop these alternative capital flows and marketplaces and systems that create liquidity for individuals, you give them the chance to now build these businesses and do what they think they should do, invest in the things that they believe are worth investing in. And I think, again, in general, individuals are better decision makers than these small groups of people that kind of live in ivory towers.
When you're looking for these companies that, do what reflects your ideals, what do you look for in a founder? Like, what qualities make a good leader? And like, how do you know that this person can make...
Yeah, this is like a really interesting question. So I think a lot of people have these frameworks that they use and very rigidly live within these frameworks. The founder has to be technical.
Right.
Or the founder has to be between this age and that age. Or the founder is generally of this gender. Or the founder has to have gone to these schools. Or the founder, and so you develop all of these rules mostly based on the historic look back of what's worked before.
Right.
And what I think that basically eliminates is this idea that most people have the ability to be brilliant at something. And for me, what I'm really trying to figure out is whether they have the right characteristics that allow them to be malleable enough to seize an opportunity. Because, in the world of startups, in my opinion, there's as much, if not more, luck than there is skill. Timing, the right technology decisions at the right time, a few critical hires at the right time, a few critical features at the right time. And frankly, you can have a substandard group of people get those things right and beat what is on paper a tremendously better group of people, right, who didn't make those decisions.
Right.
So what you're really trying to figure out, in my opinion, is how does their mind work? Are they scrappy enough? Are they listening? Are they cynical enough to push back? And those characteristics are hard to define. And I think they're manifested in wildly varying ways. What I'm trying to figure out is whether those things exist. And can I plant enough seeds where the intellectual curiosity of the person will guide the decision, as opposed to some great rhetoric that I may spew and then they just blindly run into a brick wall because that's what they think I told them to do. That's not important.
How should someone approach you as an investor or VC? And I mean, you don't have to possibly talk about specifics on how you find companies that you work with, but in general, if someone has an idea and is down the road with a startup and is looking for a VC, what do you think is the best way to approach?
I mean, this is unfortunately the standard corporal response that every VC gives you, and I don't really have a better one. But the way that this culture works, in many ways sort of similar to how American Idol works, for better or for worse, which is there's all of these intermediate levels of selection and filtering that happens. So, for example, somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that knows me, or any other VC. And typically what happens, it goes through this chain and people ask this question, hey, does it pass my sniff test? And if it does, they pass it to the next guy because they want the next guy to not look at him and say, why did you send me this thing?
Right.
So it's like, if your idea is for chocolate covered dog biscuits, you're not probably going to go and try to pitch that to Klein or Sequoia. And so somewhere along the chain, someone's going to say, there's a more appropriate avenue of capital for chocolate covered dog biscuits. Now, if those chocolate covered dog biscuits had some sort of biosensor built into it so that you can now map the intestinal tract of the dog and prevent parvo and 9 other diseases, maybe, right? And so there's all of this filtering that happens. And so by the time that it gets to these guys, it's at a point where they can make relatively straightforward decisions. And so that's typically how it happens is somebody who knows a VC, and it kind of goes through that cycle. That being said, there are still many, many people who, in my opinion, should have access to capital to pursue their ideas and don't. And that's why I think there's some amazing things that are happening right now, again, in this sort of financial services ecosystem that is, in my opinion, transformational for capitalism and capitalism by individual, entrepreneurs. So specifically, a company that I think is doing amazing things, AngelList, right? So, you could be in, some small little town somewhere, and it could be you and 3 people who just have a really great technical idea. And if you can sort of explain that well, and you can start to sort of, put out a beta version of a product and, be out there in the ecosystem and have credibility, you could raise money there. So to me, that's amazing. So if I was an entrepreneur that didn't know anybody, I would first try to go this path of AngelList and try to build some technical credibility and product traction and use that as a conduit to sort of get introduced to people via that chain.